The following special presentation of your Hometown Health Connection Community Conversations, Heal, Talk, Act, is presented by Buffalo Healthy Living Magazine with support from the Buffalo Federation of Neighborhood Centers, Karamia Pet Resort, Circuit Clinical, Endeavor Health Services, Medical Society of the County of Erie, the National Federation for Just Communities, People Incorporated, Community Services for Everyone, Horizon Health Services, Spectrum Health and Human Services, Best Self Behavioral Health, and WBBZ-TV.
I'm Sandy White with John Sciullo. Now, in light of the recent racially motivated mass shooting on May 14th, there's much talk about it, and so we decided to create a community conversation. We need to talk about racism, prejudice, and why Buffalo is the 6th most segregated city in the United States. John, we need to talk about the lack of access to healthy food, health care, mental health services, and affordable housing in certain zip codes. Welcome back to part 2 of our community conversation as we continue the conversation, continue the discussion with our guests.
We have great guests. Rene Pettis-Jones, President of the National Federation of Just Communities. We know them as the NFJC. Those programs promote understanding and respect among people of all races, religions, and cultures through advocacy, conflict resolution, and education by raising community awareness, education, and empowering youth, and emerging and community leaders to become agents of change in transforming our society. Rene earned her degree from UB, where she focused on psychology and human services with advanced courses at UB.
We also have with us today Chandra Redfern. She's the CEO of Buffalo Federation of Neighborhood Centers, BFNC. And BFNC is a nonprofit human services agency that provides comprehensive family-focused services for adults and youth living in low-income and disadvantaged neighborhoods throughout Buffalo, Niagara Falls, and Lockport. Now, Chandra is the agency's Chief Operating Officer for over 3 years, its Director of Residential Services for 6.5 years, and Program Coordinator for over 5 years, John.
And Sandy White is next to me, an award-winning news reporter and anchor. Sandy worked at WBBZ-TV, Channel 4 here in Buffalo, KNBC-TV, Channel 4 in Los Angeles, Channel 2 in Buffalo, Channel 7.
And now WBBZ.
And now WBBZ. President of Mustard Seed World Consulting Group.
Yes, my own baby company.
Communications and award-winning urban planning firm dedicated to the transformation of people, neighborhoods, and cities, and a board member of the Alzheimer's Association of West New York. So Sandy is also going to be launching a new support team on the east side of Buffalo to help families deal with the disease, with the Alzheimer's. So,
and you know all about Alzheimer's disease. You were on the board, and it's very important to make sure that education is a part of the journey.
So Sandy, let's get started with part 2 of our conversation.
Absolutely.
If you missed part 1 last week, it's online, Buffalo Healthy Living, the website, and we thank Annette Pinder for helping put this program together. So Rene, let's talk about the NFJC. Because its stated mission, and to everyone, it's about racism, bias, ending discrimination, building understanding, respect and trust, education, very important, advocacy. So give us the mission statement again of the NFJC.
You know, I can do it in a nutshell. We try to bridge divides.
I love it.
That's it. We want to bring people together. We want to talk. We want to learn from each other. We want to encourage this togetherness that we're seeing, the outpouring of love that we're seeing as a response to this tragedy. That's what we want to see every day in our communities.
And Chandra, the BFNC.
It's really simple. Our doors are open to anyone to help them navigate the path from where they are to where they'd like to be.
It's a lot of love flowing in. We were talking about that earlier, and you know, with such a negative impact, there's love flowing in from all over the world, all over the country. And I do believe that people are good at heart. It's just that we need to know more about how we can help bridge that gap.
And how we can have what I guess you would define as respectful conversations with one another, not only on television, but at your home at your workplace, with your friends. And Chandra and Rene, I guess I'll ask, where should these conversations start and where should they go? And have you been having them?
Well, the answer to the second question is yes. Yes, we have to have these conversations. I've been having these conversations. We have to start with those closest to us, those in our circles, because we'd be surprised at the number of people that are close to us that do not understand.
You know what's really interesting about that? That's a good place to start. Instead of making this massive, we have to change the world right away, just start with one person at a time.
Exactly.
Is that what you're saying?
Exactly. People always ask me, well, what can we do to, help change, this racist society and these things? And I said, it starts with you and your circle. Because the reality is there are people in your circle that I will never come in contact with, but you will. And so you can start the change.
Rene, how about you?
I think I love Chandra's description of it starts with me and I want to know more about you. Tell me more about your story and tell me a little bit more about your background. I want to just build that sense of camaraderie, that sense of togetherness. I want to get to know you.
Well, I think that brings us to something that Sandy brought up in one of our phone conversations prior to the program, and that is getting to know one another. And I think it might be interesting to find out if we simply ask each other about our own backgrounds.
Tell me about your background, John.
Well, I grew up in Philadelphia.
Philly?
Yeah, I came here 40 years ago, 20 years old, right out of college. But I grew up in a very modest neighborhood, and my father was always out of my life. So it was my mother, and my grandmother, and my grandfather. That's where my core family was. My father was very abusive to my mom. So I learned a lot with my mom about independence and hard work because she had to bring home the bacon. On the other side of the coin, and I don't mean to sound disrespectful, but my grandfather, who was a World War I Marine,
Awesome.
was a lot like Archie Bunker. And we all know that character, well, maybe some of you don't, from All in the Family, a popular television show in the 70s. I would be, it's tough for me to say this. I don't want to say he was a bigot, but I want to say that there were things that happened in the house, and I heard things that were very difficult. And we talked about this in the first show, how you learn behaviors. And again, I don't mean to sound disrespectful, but that was my life. So that was how I grew up. And I went to Catholic school, and I went to an all-Catholic.
Was it reinforced throughout your life?
It was not reinforced to the degree that I've seen in other families, but it was out there. And it was out there.
You were sensitive to it.
I was sensitive to it because I thought it was wrong. And I knew it was wrong because in grade school, I would see things that would happen to children of color, and I thought, that's not acceptable. When I went to an all-boys Catholic high school, you get the religion kind of dug into you, and that's when it really became evident that, we all have to work together. And I went to Temple University and actually managed Black History Month programs as part of the Student Activity Center.
What a turnaround for you.
It was a very big turnaround, but that was, and then came to Buffalo. And so I'm lucky that I guess that I felt in my heart that I realized what I was hearing was not the right thing. But in the neighborhood, there were kids who heard the same thing from some of their parents and some
kids
of their
can
relatives.
be very cruel.
They can be.
Kids can be real tough. And because they may have heard it in their environment and they accepted that it's okay to demean other groups.
But these are the things that maybe are not talked about, that some of these discussions and things that kids were exposed to at a young age impacted them and still, sits in their minds, even, no matter how old
So you may be always trying to equalize, to try to make the good overshadow, you think so?
I think so.
I think that's a good thing that you're aware of it, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely.
And there are some people that are not. And they create policy that changes the lives of people. Chandra, did you grow up here in Buffalo?
not too far in Niagara Falls.
Uh-huh. And what did you grow up thinking and believing, and what was your experience? And thank you, John.
Oh, you're welcome.
So interestingly, my father is from the South. And he came to Niagara Falls when he was a teenager based on some things that were happening at the time in the South, and he had to flee for his life. And so he met my mother in Niagara Falls, and my mother was very northern. So my father always said that there was...
You just said something that just hit me. He had to flee for his life?
Yes.
Explain that. 'Cause some people don't understand
So
that.
my father was 15, and he lived in Birmingham, Alabama. That's where my father's family is from. And he basically had gotten into an altercation with a white teenager. And you just didn't do that when he was a young boy. And so they wanted to kill him. And so his family sent him north to save his life.
I've heard of these stories before.
And, you know, it's unfortunate, but I'm thankful because I came along. And my mother was very northern. And so my father always, there was this underlying thing that, you know, you have to kind of watch white people, you know, maybe not be so trusting. And my mother was the opposite. My mother was like, you know, people are people, and you treat people how you'd want to be treated. You don't look at necessarily their skin color. And so my mother and my grandmother, who was very prominent in my life growing up, my grandmother is a registered nurse, and she's retired now, of course, but she always taught us, just work hard. If you work hard, then, you know, you don't have to worry so much about your skin color, because that's how she was raised, right? And, you know, growing up, I kind of lived with that, but I think I probably was maybe at the end of elementary school when I learned, no, there's difference. You know, I don't think up until that point that I ever really realized.
You were treated differently by your peers?
Well, yes, right. So I grew up in a black home. My parents were working class. My father worked in a factory. You know, my mother was a bank teller at the time. But so maybe I would pronounce things differently. And so you start to see things, and then it's, well, why is your hair like that? Why is your nose like that? Why are your lips so full? So I think that's when I really started to understand, like, wow, there's some real differences, and there are people that don't necessarily view me in the light of what, you know, being intelligent is or being beautiful is. And I think that starts to take a toll on a young person.
Did you ever hear, John, I know I heard this growing up, and maybe you did, you have to work twice as hard to be accepted for equal. That's what I heard growing up. You're gonna just have to work twice as hard because you'll never be accepted for being good. You have to be extra in order to be accepted for being good. And I was raised with that kind of thinking, because what we were hearing is that you'll never get fair treatment. What have you heard?
The same. And it's interesting how Chandra was mentioning about growing up, and you know, I'm Buffalonian through and through, raised in North Buffalo. My parents decided that they wanted to provide for me as best as they could, and I appreciated that. Being an only child, it was easy that I could have been spoiled or given everything, and you know, of course, you don't want to be raised that way, but they taught me values that, you know, we need to respect one another. We need to respect each other's positions, our backgrounds. I think for me, when you talk about working twice as hard, I think about how people listen to me, and just my voice. I used to do telephone sales, and everybody always presumed, oh, you know, that's that white person that called me. I'm thinking, if you only could see me on the other end of that line. That was well before Zooming and all of the wonderful things that we do, that, you know, no, I'm black. And you're not respecting me for me because you're presuming something.
So there's a lot of psychological, oh God, what is the right way of saying it?
Well, predisposed
Thinking.
ideas.
Right, and it can be exhausting for a person of color, because you know when you walk in a room, there's going to be check, check, check. Are you dangerous? Are you trustworthy? Do I want to work with you? There are all these little hoops that people of color have to go through, and it's unfortunate. I don't know if that's just ingrained in society, or I think this racism is pretty deep.
Do you think that continues today?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. But get to the root of it. To get to the root of the problem is by listening, just like you're listening, and just checking yourself out.
So tell us about your background, Sandy.
My background was raised in Buffalo, but we came out of Nashville, Tennessee. My mom and dad found each other, fell in love at Tennessee State, and moved up to Buffalo, New York, raised on the east side of Buffalo, right outside the stadium, the rock pile. And 5 children. He's a real estate broker. My mother's a registered nurse. Raised the children. Dad wants to move to North Buffalo. Takes the 5 children. We were all adorable. We live on this beautiful street, this beautiful Dutch colonial. And then as we were walking around, quiet little girls with pigtails. We were just children, playing with our baby dolls and a game of jacks. Not bothering anyone, but then we saw our neighbor who pointed to us and called us the N-word. Was she talking to us? This is our neighbor right next door. And she was looking through the window pointing at us, and we were like, I don't understand that, because we didn't understand what that was, that anger.
How did you respond?
There was anger.
How did you respond?
It was almost like I thought I saw spit pop out of her.
How did you respond? How did you
Kinda,
coexist?
well, we ignored her. My parents taught us to ignore evil and negativity. And many years later, when I bought the home, my parents moved back to the east side. I had a lettuce garden. I had this garden, and she was still there. So I took the lettuce and I wrapped it up in paper and I took it over as a gift. And she ate the salad and said, that was the best salad she's ever had. And we started talking. But that's 20 years later.
Yeah.
And her sons were great. We interacted with their sons, She called us the N-word. We didn't know what that meant. And we didn't understand why she was so angry. So it scarred me to a little bit.
It's a tough word.
It's a tough attitude. And I think there are a lot of people in the world, in the country, that have this attitude. And why would children want to just lash out at kids, right?
It's interesting that you say that, because when you walk into a room, you just want you to be able to come into the room, your true, authentic self, your whole self. You don't want your color to be the first thing that enters the room.
Well, Dr. King had that great dream. And still, I believe it's possible, right?
Right.
So if you had to deal with your neighbor, as you dealt with your neighbor, how do you, Chandra and Rene, and Chandra, we'll start with you, how do you deal with somebody who has that same sort of hateful attitude? And how would you suggest somebody who's watching deal with somebody who has that, who's in that same situation? Because I can't imagine.
Yeah.
Well, I was taught much like Sandy was. So it's you can't react negatively to negativity, right?
But you have to stand up for yourself.
You have to stand up for yourself, absolutely. And I've found that one of the best ways is to almost prove people wrong. Because remember,
work harder.
Yeah, we spoke earlier about there's this picture that people have created. So, when they see that, oh, well, they do keep their yard up and they keep their home up and they're not like this. I think it's through experience.
And they have fathers.
And they have
working fathers.
And they work and those things. I think it's through shattering what the stereotype is for some people, not all. But I think that a lot of people that have these preconceived ideas of what Black people are or what Latinx people are or whatever, a lot of times I've never had an interaction. Or maybe it was a bad interaction.
I think she's onto something.
Well,
it's just you believe what the media tells you, right?
Right.
And it's not just the Black community that experiences prejudice and issues. There's, the gay community, the Latino community. I mean, anybody that's considered a minority, I guess, or in some category or in some silo.
You're editing yourself as you go. You're amazing.
I'm trying.
I see. He's checking his thoughts and the way he's thinking.
So, you want to say the right thing, but you want to also say something that needs to be said.
Right,
You know?
right.
You talk about family, Renee. You
Yes.
brought up in a great family, and Chandra the same thing. And Sandy, you too.
Mm-hmm.
How important, Renee, is the family unit? And sometimes we hear the lack of the family unit, no matter what color you are.
Right.
How important is that in moving and educating young people to grow up without these prejudices, without these beliefs that are negative?
Well, they can make or break, these young kids, because again, it's what they're learning, what they're hearing in these family structures. It's the conversations that the families are having, much to your story, John, about what you were hearing and what you may have internalized as a young child. So if your family structure is solid, like in my case it was, we were taught that we look beyond skin color and look into the content of your character. That makes more of a difference than what's on the outside and what you present us with. And that goes for anything. It could be a disability, it could be any type of outward difference that we might find. Look inside, find that character inside that person. And I think that the family structure, it's up to families to promote that, to make sure that we look for the good in people. Don't fall into that stereotypes of the Archie Bunkers and the preconceived notions of what has happened in the past. Know our history, understand where we've come from, but understand that again, we have to look ahead. We've got to look to this next generation, and how do we empower our youth to feel good about themselves and accept each other the way they are.
We have to build those bridges so that we can cross over on them.
Right.
And they have to be built with trust and love and caring. I think the children, the young people to come can do that, but we have to build those bridges, and you can only do it through education.
Yes.
And it takes community. I mean, we're speaking, and what I will say is that, our home started with two parents, and at some point in my life, my parents divorced. And so things shifted, but I always had a firm community that was providing those values.
So no matter what happens in the
Yes.
structure of the family, that community, that caring community is what we're all hoping for, that comes
Exactly.
out of this at some point, that we can wrap our arms around
Exactly.
that.
Yes.
We talked about, in the open of the show, we talked about issues with mental health, education, health overall, health care, and food and nutrition. And one of the things we've learned about as a result of the shooting is we've heard the term food desert, and we've seen people respond with donations of food to help the community get through, who don't have now that opportunity to go to a real large supermarket, to at least temporarily, we hope, until they can bring that back. How important is that when you see, Chandra, when you see the nutritional value of food and how children may not be getting the right nutrition at home, and that they have to get that through their schools sometimes?
It's so key. I mean, I don't know how children go to school when they're hungry. We run into children that have never had a fresh fruit or a fresh vegetable, and I think it's kind of far removed for many of us. But the problem is when you live in a community where there's one grocery store that can provide that, and you have to rely perhaps on corner stores, and I have nothing against them, but they don't provide full supermarket value, then people are stuck to do what it is they have to do. And so if you're on a limited income, or your income comes in at a certain time of month, you have to really plan how you're going to get to the store, what's going to last, what's not. You can't go every week.
And our seniors suffer as a result.
And the seniors
many
as well.
times they don't have transportation.
Exactly.
I think there are probably people listening and viewing that want to know, how did it get this bad? Why is it that there are deserts where people can't find? Is it a result of disinvestment? Is it a result of redlining? Can you put it all together so they understand how we got here? Because sometimes people innocently, they don't know how they got here.
Right. And you figure a lot of people weren't aware of all of these issues prior to May 14th. And just imagine that this has been going on for years. They were built into the systems, unfortunately.
To separate groups, to
Exactly.
put them in certain areas, and for
Absolutely.
the resources to be taken out.
That's right.
That's not something that people thought was going on,
No.
but you're saying it has been going on.
Absolutely. You go back even just at the construction of the 33 that they've been talking about now, trying to cover over. The way you separate people, the way you water down people and keep them separated from their families, from their communities. You don't give an opportunity
So these are
for them.
policy issues,
That's right.
but they've been backed, though.
Yes, absolutely.
Is it because were they backed because people didn't know
No,
what
they
was happening?
probably knew, but they knew what they were doing because it's keeping systems of power in power. You're keeping people over people. Redlining is just that process. And that idea that it was okay for black people to buy on the east side only, but not in the suburbs, not on the northern side. That happened to me and my family. You know, we were only the second family allowed in North Buffalo at the time on our street. And of course, they had to have a big community meeting to talk about, wow, there's more than one family here. What can we do about it? Those kind of processes, that sticks with you. And that's happened years prior to this tragedy.
We only have literally 2 minutes left in our second program, but I just wanted to make mention, and maybe Chandra and Sandy and Rene, you can comment quickly. The families of the victims, I think we're going to get strength from them, from their bravery, because they're going to fight for change. They're going to fight for not only legislation for violence and gun laws, but I think they're also going to help us grow as a community so that we don't let these conversations just stop when it's off the headlines.
You know, it's real important you mentioned that we've been seeing, we were talking about all the love and the support that's coming in from all over the country. Even the National Urban League president was here recently and said, Buffalo, you have not been forgotten. Because, you know, the news cycles, John, sometimes information is just a news cycle and then it's over. So it's good to see that the help is coming and hopefully all that's being planned will come to fruition. It will be transformation.
Chandra, you have a final word?
It's great to see the community pulling together, and I think it's a start. And I think if the community can continue to pull together and have conversations such as these, then we may start to chip away at the problem.
Renee?
Everyone can play a role in healing our community. Just make sure that you try to find the way that you can play that critical piece.
All right.
I love the way she said that.
Sandy, this is the end of our second show and out of time for part 2 of our conversation.
I've enjoyed being with you.
Thanks. I've enjoyed being with my friend Sandy White. So thanks to our guests,
Yes.
Rene Pettis-Jones, President of the National Federation of Just Communities. The NFJC has opportunities for participation or contributing to the programs at nfjcwny.org. Chandra Redfern, thank you, CEO of the Buffalo Federation of Neighborhood Centers. The BFNC always needs help with donations, volunteers, participating in programs. Sign up or help out and donate at bfnc.org. And thank you, Sandy White. We'll get together again
Thank you,
soon.
John. This is the beginning of the beginning.
Yep. Thanks to Annette Pinder and Buffalo Healthy Living Magazine and our sponsors for putting this together. We hope that this conversation will help make a difference in our hometown. Thanks for
Make
watching.
that change.
Yeah. This special edition of Your Hometown Health Connection Community Conversations, Heal, Talk, Act, was presented by Buffalo Healthy Living Magazine with support from the Buffalo Federation of Neighborhood Centers, Karamia Pet Resort, Circuit Clinical, Endeavor Health Services, Medical Society of the County of Erie, the National Federation for Just Communities, People Incorporated, Community Services for Everyone, Horizon Health Services, Spectrum Health and Human Services, Best Self Behavioral Health, and WBBZ-TV.